Hello, welcome back. You have joined us for Numbers chapter 17, and depending on your version, remember I said this 16, 17, and 18 are really one block, and depending on your version, how they've been split up. So, one of the stories yours may not have, if you have the New Living Translation, it'll start with the budding of Aaron's staff. But if you read the complete Jewish Bible, it's going to start with the fire pan story from the previous one. So we're going to do the complete Jewish Bible because I think it's just a little bit more clear and true to what the kind of flow of what we're going about. So I will say, if this is your first video, go back to the beginning. It'll make a lot more sense. I was praying about Deuteronomy this morning and teaching it in the coming weeks. And I'm really excited about it because for the first 40 years of my life, I didn't know much about the Old Testament. But until very recently, I didn't know that Deuteronomy is essentially Moses' Sermon on the Mount, and the patterns and the things that are the same blew me away. And that's really part of what got me into this. So that's the sermon for today. Let's jump into Numbers chapter 17. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell Eleazar the son of Aaron and Cohen to remove the fire pans from the fire and scatter the smoldering coals at a distance, because they have become holy. Also, the fire pans of these men whose sin cost them their lives have become holy, because they were offered before Adonai. Therefore, have them hammered into plates to cover the altar. This will be a sign for the people of Israel." Eleazar the Cohen took the brass fire pans which the men who had been burned to death had offered, and they hammered them into a covering for the altar, to remind the people of Israel that an ordinary person not descended from Aaron is not to approach and burn incense before Adonai, if he wants to avoid the fate of Korah and his group, as Adonai had said to him through Moshe. On the very next day, the whole community of the people of Israel complained against Moshe and Aaron. "You have killed Adonai's people." However, as the community was assembling against Moshe and Aaron, they looked in the direction of the tent of meeting and saw the cloud cover it and the glory of Adonai appear. Moshe and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting. Adonai said to Moshe, "Get away from this assembly, and I will destroy them at once." But they fell on their faces. Moshe said to Aaron, "Take your fire pan, put fire from the altar in it, lay incense on it, and hurry with it to the assembly to make atonement for them, because anger has gone out from Adonai, and the plague has already begun." Aaron took it as Moshe had said and ran into the middle of the assembly. Quick note too, assembly here is the same word as assembly in the New Testament. The word church is something we came up with in English. Assembly is really just a group of people. So, an active group of people, I guess I should say. Aaron took it as Moshe had said and ran into the middle of the assembly. There the plague had already begun among the people, but he added the incense and made atonement for the people. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Those dying from the plague numbered 14,700, besides those who died in the Korah incident. Aaron returned to Moshe at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the plague was stopped. Adonai said to Moshe, "Speak to the people of Israel and take from them staffs, one for each ancestral tribe, from each leader of a tribe, 12 staffs. Write each man's name on his staff, and write Aaron's name on the staff of Levi. For each tribe's leader is to have one staff. Put them in the tent of meeting in front of the testimony where I meet with you. The staff of the man I am going to choose will sprout buds. It is in this way I will put a stop to the complaints the people of Israel keep making against you." Moshe spoke to the people of Israel, and all their leaders gave him staffs, one for each leader according to their ancestral tribes, 12 staffs. Aaron's staff was among their staffs. Moshe put the staffs before Adonai in the tent of the testimony. The next day Moshe went into the tent of testimony, and there he saw that Aaron's staff for the house of Levi had budded. It had sprouted not only buds, but flowers and ripe almonds as well. Moshe brought out the staffs from before Adonai to all the people of Israel, and they looked, and each man took back his staff. Adonai said to Moshe, "Return Aaron's staff to its place in front of the testimony. It is to be kept there as a sign to the rebels so that they will stop grumbling against me and thus not die. Moshe did this. He did as Adonai had ordered him. But the people of Israel said to Moshe, "Oh no, we're dead men, lost. We're all lost. Whenever anyone approaches the tabernacle of Adonai, he dies. We will all perish." Isn't it crazy when you read the Bible that was written thousands of years ago, and you realize the same thing happens now. We're all picturing things in church or in our organization or whatever it is that have happened that way. And so it to me, that's what opens up the Old Testament for us, because so much is happening and it's so relatable when you ask God to really open it up for you. So remember, like I said, the chapters are really one unit that we split up. And so some of those stories may have been in 16 or 17 or 18, depending on how your version of the Bible goes. So basically, what we learn here too is common things can contract holiness when they're offered to God, to Jehovah. So these were common coals, and these coals were taken away from the holy area and disposed of because they weren't supposed to be holy, but they contracted holiness. So this is where clean and unclean and how holy and common matter, because we understand how it's contracted. If it's offered to God, it contracts holiness. That's why when we say, hey, if I win the lottery, I'm giving $1 million to God. Like, you've now set it in front of God and made it his. You need to give it to him because he expects it. Otherwise, you're stealing from God because it's already his once you offer it up to him. So the fire pans had to be hammered into a lid for the fire basket of the altar. And this served two purposes. It served the practical purposes of keeping the coals hot overnight, because now they're a little bit better insulated. And it was a reminder of what happens when unauthorized person approaches a sacred area that God did not tell them they were supposed to do. And this applies to people. I know when we think of young people getting together and taking away that sacredness and encroaching on that, but also other people. When we manipulate other people, or we hurt other people, or we do things emotionally towards other people or physically, we're doing the same thing. We're encroaching on a child of God, and you don't want to do that. That's God's property. So if we like to tell people we belong to God, well, so does that other Christian. So when we tear them down, we're tearing down God's property. And we need to look at it that way, because that's the way he looks at it. So it's the only way that matters. So it would also remind people of what happens when men declare what's holy and what's not holy, or who is holy and who's not holy. And we do that all over the place. I think of the Vatican and the many things that they've declared as holy. It's like God's the only one that can declare something as holy. And he shows us in Numbers chapter 17 that he's not okay with us doing that. I think it's pretty clear, but much of the community still doesn't understand, so they set up a protest against Moses and Aaron. They believed Moses and Aaron manipulated God to do it for them. And before we think, well, those dumb Hebrews, it's like, no, that's how pagan gods worked. If you gave enough, did enough, you could manipulate them into doing what you wanted. That was the belief. So you gave more, did more, gave more of your body and soul to this false god, it would eventually do what you wanted. And also, before we think, well, that's just ridiculous in and of itself, we have people in every church that feel the same way. If I come and I sing and I pray and I do all of this work, God will finally love me. Instead of somebody explaining to them that God loves them. God wants them to live for him and quit trying to live for own, acknowledgement and this works mentality, because that's not going to get you close to God. God doesn't want that relationship. He wants a relationship based on love. And out of that love and obedience to follow him. That's as simple as I think I can make it sound. But so again, the people rebelled, and God announces his intention to wipe them out. And so Moses and Aaron fall on their faces again, and they're pleading with God, but they're expecting this to be happening over their heads as they're facing the ground, because this is God. This is what God said he was going to do. And sometimes we make God out to be this nice, sweet, friendly grandpa, but he's really, he's the God of the universe. And when he says do something, that's what you're supposed to do, not change it around in some other way. So, and God tells Moses and Aaron to separate themselves from these people because there will be divine retribution. So the righteous will be affected when the unrighteous are being punished if we don't separate ourselves from them. I can't be part of a group and think the effects of their sin aren't going to impact me. There's just no way to do that. I'm not insulated against that. And that's the idea he's telling us: separate yourselves from the wicked. Lot had to be dragged out of the city, and his wife turned into a pillar of salt because she couldn't separate herself. She looked back. And when the Lord destroyed the earth in the great flood, the flood killed everybody. It was indiscriminate. Back in Egypt, God killed all the firstborns, and it didn't matter whether the firstborn was a Hebrew or Egyptian or whatever. He provided the means for those who trusted in him to separate themselves, but if they chose not to, he didn't make them. And attached or identified means basically we identify with their ways and we agreed to it. So even though I didn't have much to do with that decision wherever it was made, I've identified with this group that's made a decision that's against God. I need to separate myself from it. And so that's what we learned here. The more obedient we are, the more we're labeled as fanatics. We're not tolerant enough. If we believe that Israel giving land to the Palestinians is wrong, then we're labeled a Zionist or whatever. And the rebellion really was the belief that neither a mediator or a priest was needed to represent the people of God. The stumbling block that everyone faces, everyone on our planet in their lifetime at some point has to face this stumbling block, that we do need a mediator and high priest, and that is Yeshua, Jesus the Christ, the Messiah. And he is the point of that argument now, is people are like, we don't need that, we can go straight to God. It's like, no, God says no, you need a mediator and a high priest, and he has provided the perfect mediator and high priest, and that's Yeshua. So he's still teaching that lesson thousands of years later. So this is exactly what Korah, Dathan, and Abraham and all their followers were saying. We can do it ourselves, our way. We don't need the way God says. We can do it our way. And we can declare ourselves to be holy. Then when God destroyed them, many blamed Moses and Aaron. And it's like, wait a minute. He was the one telling you, you can't just do it. So a plague is sent. And just as fire pans were used to start the rebellion, they wanted their own fire. It's used to atone. When he goes running into the crowd of the plague, he atones for it. He's showing us that a high priest and mediator are needed. Moses needed to send him, and Aaron needed to do the atonement. Jesus is both of those roles in full. And God's teaching us you need a mediator and a high priest. And I provided it. So Aaron takes the coals from the brazen altar and puts them on his fire pan and put incense on top, and runs all the way over there, makes atonement. But close to 50,000 people have already perished within minutes. That's how many people have been dying, in this whole story. So the seriousness of the situation required Aaron as high priest to make atonement. It was a community and an assembly wide. And so the high priest had to make atonement for that. So verse 14 puts the blame directly on Korah. Korah fell to his own evil inclination, and that is what most people do. They think in their own terms. It's the everyone knows it. Don't rely on your own understanding, but we do it all the time. Aaron's offering obviously worked, and then they devised another test. The holder of the staff has the tribal leadership, and they now recognize the gravity of questioning God. Doesn't last long, but they recognize it. And their rebellion really against Moses. So the Israelites are too terrified now to come anywhere near the wilderness tabernacle. That's why they're saying, oh, now we can't even go close to it. We'll die. And it's like they're starting to understand the gravity of God. God is not to be treated as just common. He is holy, holy of holies, the holiest, and we need to treat it as such, not as common. So, God bless. We'll get into Numbers chapter 18 next time. And don't forget, love God, love people, and change the world.